In 1971, a company called Rival put a beige stoneware pot on store shelves and quietly changed dinner in America forever. For the first time, a mother could start supper at 7 in the morning, walk out the door, and come home 9 hours later to a meal that had cooked itself. Number 4 on this list fed a family of 6 for under $2. Number 11 showed up in the instruction booklet of nearly every crock-pot sold. And number 1 was in almost every kitchen in the country. Hit that subscribe button. Let us count down. Number 25, beef stew. This was the meal that made the crock-pot a household name, and for good reason. A tough chuck roast that would have chewed like leather in a hot oven turned meltingly tender after 8 or 9 hours on low. Your mom would cube 2 pounds of chuck, toss it with a little flour, and drop it in over sliced onions, carrots, celery, or in quartered potatoes. A can of tomato juice or a beef bouillon cube dissolved in water was the whole liquid. She salted it, peppered it, snapped the lid on, and left for the day. By 5 o'clock, the house smelled like Sunday, even though it was a Tuesday. The flour thickened the broth into gravy. The vegetables softened into the meat. A chuck roast ran about 89 cents a pound in 1973, and this one pot fed the whole family with enough left for lunch. Nobody stood over a stove. That was the miracle. Number 24, Swiss steak. Not steak from Switzerland, but tough round steak that got its name from Swissing, an old word for pounding meat tender between rollers. In a crock pot, your mom skipped the pounding entirely and let time do the work. She would lay cheap round steak in the bottom, cover it with a can of stewed tomatoes, sliced onion, and a little Worcestershire, then leave it to cook down all day. The acid in the tomatoes broke the meat apart until you could cut it with a fork. Round steak cost about $1 a pound and was too tough to serve any other way without hours of babysitting a skillet. Served over mashed potatoes or white egg noodles, it looked like something from a supper club. It cost like a Tuesday. This appeared on dinner tables from Ohio to Nebraska, and every mother swore her version was the best. Number 23, ham and beans suun soup. When the Easter or Christmas ham was picked down to the bone, that bone did not go in the trash. It went into the crock pot with a bag of dried navy beans soaked overnight, a chopped onion, a couple of carrots, and enough water to cover everything by 2 inches. Then it cooked all day without a single stir. By evening, the beans had gone creamy, the broth had turned cloudy and rich, and every last scrap of smoke had been pulled off that bone. A 1-pound bag of navy beans cost around 30 cents and fed a family for 2 days. The ham bone was free, already paid for at a holiday dinner. This was arithmetic your grandmother understood in her bones. Nothing that could feed you was ever thrown away. Served with cornbread or saltines, it was the definition of getting a second meal out of a first one. Number 22, chicken cacciatore. In the 1970s, hunter-style chicken felt exotic and a little fancy, and the crock-pot made it foolproof. Your mom would lay bone-in chicken pieces in the pot, pour a jar or can of tomato sauce over them, and add sliced green peppers, mushrooms, onion, and a shake of oregano. It cooked low all day until the meat fell off the bone and the sauce thickened into something that clung to a fork of spaghetti. A cut-up chicken cost under $1. The whole thing tasted like an Italian restaurant that charged 4 times as much. This was the meal a mother made when the neighbors were coming over on a weeknight and she still had a full day of errands ahead of her. She looked like she had fussed for hours. She had actually walked out the door at 8 in the morning and let the pot do it. Number 21, sloppy joes. Not from a can. The homemade kind that simmered all afternoon until the flavors melted together. Your mom browned a pound of ground beef in the morning, drained it and dumped it in the crock pot with tomato sauce, a spoonful of brown sugar, a squirt of mustard, diced onion, and a little vinegar. That was it. By dinner, it had cooked down into a thick, tangy, slightly sweet mixture that piled onto hamburger buns and ran down everyone's wrists. Ground beef ran about 69 cents a pound, and this stretched 1 pound across a whole family of kids. It was the meal that made a Wednesday feel like a treat. The buns got soft where the filling soaked in. Children asked for seconds and never once thought of it as poor food because it never tasted like anything but a good time. Number 20, pork chops and sauerkraut. This was the German-American heartland in a single pot, common across Pennsylvania, Ohio, and the whole upper Midwest. Your mom layered cheap, thin pork chops over a drained jar of sauerkraut, added a peeled and sliced apple for sweetness, a sprinkle of caraway seed, and maybe a little brown sugar to soften the tang. Then she left it alone for 8 hours. The kraut mellowed as it cooked, losing its sharp bite and turning silky. The pork went so tender it flaked. The apple all but dissolved into the kraut, sweetening the whole thing without anyone tasting fruit. Pork chops were among the cheapest cuts at the meat counter, and a jar of sauerkraut cost pennies. This was a full supper that cost almost nothing and filled the kitchen with a smell that meant winter and comfort and home. Number 19, split pea soup with ham. Here is where the Crock-Pot really earned its keep. A bag of dried split peas, a leftover ham bone or a ham hock, a chopped onion, a carrot, and water. Nothing else. The peas dissolved into a thick green porridge after a full day of simmering, and the ham bone gave up every last trace of smoky richness it had. The result was a soup so dense you could almost stand a spoon in it. Split peas cost about a dime a pound. The ham bone was a scrap. For a busy mother, the beauty was that split pea soup could not be ruined by neglect. You could leave it on low from breakfast until dinner, and it would not scorch. It would only get thicker and better. It waited for you. Served with crackers or buttered bread, it warmed a family from the sternum outward on a cold February night. First, pattern break. Here is where things get interesting. The Crock-Pot did not just cook food. It solved a problem that was rearranging American life in the 1970s. For the first time in history, mothers were leaving the house for work in enormous numbers. The old model, where someone stood in the kitchen from 4 in the afternoon browning and stirring and watching, was collapsing. Families still had to eat, but nobody was home to make dinner the old way. Rival sold 5 million crock-pots in a single year at the peak, and they were not selling a kitchen gadget. They were selling the one thing a working mother did not have: time. You loaded it before dawn, exhausted and half awake, and it handed you a hot meal at the end of a 9-hour day when you had nothing left to give. That was not convenience. That was survival, dressed up in avocado green stoneware. Number 18, beef and barley soup. When the budget was thin and the week was long, a handful of pearl barley turned a little bit of meat into a whole pot of dinner. Your mom would drop in some cheap stew beef, a cup of barley, an onion, carrots, celery, a can of tomatoes and beef broth, then let it cook all day. The barley swelled and swelled, thickening the soup into something hearty enough to be a meal on its own. A cup of dried barley cost almost nothing and doubled the volume of the pot. The beef, even a small amount, gave it body and depth. This was the meal that fed 6 people on a half-pound of meat, and nobody felt shortchanged. It was thick, warm, and deeply savory, the kind of soup that stuck to your ribs and got you through until morning. Church suppers across the Midwest ran on soup exactly like this. Number 17, chicken and dumplings. A stewing hen was still the cheapest chicken at the counter in the 1970s. about half the price of a fryer, and the Crock-Pot was made for it. Your mom simmered the whole bird all day with celery, onion, and carrot until the meat fell from the bone and the broth turned golden. Then, in the last hour, she cranked the pot to high and dropped spoonfuls of biscuit dough right into the bubbling liquid, put the lid back on, and let them steam into soft, pillowy clouds. The dumplings drank in the chicken flavor as they cooked. The whole pot thickened into something between a soup and a stew. This was the meal that appeared when someone was sick, when the weather turned bitter, when a family needed to feel taken care of. It was care you could eat, and a single hen made enough to last most of the week. Number 16, Porcupine meatballs. The funny name came from the rice, which poked out of the meatballs as they cooked and looked like little quills. This was a Depression-era trick that survived into the 1970s because it worked. Your mom mixed a pound of ground beef with a half cup of uncooked rice, a little onion, salt, and pepper, rolled it into balls, and set them in the crock-pot under a blanket of tomato sauce or condensed tomato soup thinned with water. As it cooked, the rice absorbed the liquid and swelled, stretching 1 pound of beef to feed a whole table. The meatballs came out tender, saucy, and filling. Ground beef ran under 70 cents a pound, and the rice cost pennies. Children thought the name was hilarious and ate them without complaint. Mothers loved that dinner was done and waiting the moment they walked in the door with an armful of grocery bags. Number 15, corned beef and cabbage. Second pattern break. Controversy incoming, sort of. Here is a meal that only worked because of the crock-pot, and food purists still argue about it. A corned beef brisket needs low, slow, gentle heat for hours, or it turns to shoe leather. On a stovetop, that meant babysitting a simmering pot all day, which no working mother had time for. In the crock-pot, you laid the brisket in with the spice packet, poured water over it, and left. 8 or 9 hours later, it sliced like butter against the grain. In the final hour, wedges of cabbage, potatoes, and carrots went into steam in the salty, spiced broth. Corned beef went on sale cheap around St. Patrick's Day, and families bought extra to freeze. This was the meal that made an immigrant tradition possible for households where nobody was home to tend a stove. The crock-pot did not invent corned beef and cabbage, it saved it. Number 14, beef stroganoff. Fancy sounding, humble to make. Your mom would put cheap round steak, cut into strips in the pot, with sliced mushrooms, onion, beef broth, and a can of cream of mushroom soup. It cooked all day until the tough meat surrendered and the sauce went rich and thick. Right before serving, she stirred in a container of sour cream off the heat so it would not curdle, then ladled the whole thing over egg noodles. It tasted like something from a white tablecloth restaurant, but it started with the toughest, cheapest steak in the case. Round steak cost about $1 a pound, and cream of mushroom soup was the secret engine behind half the casseroles in America. This was the meal a mother made when she wanted the family to feel a little special on an ordinary Thursday, and it never once revealed how little it cost or how little work it took. Number 13, ham and scalloped potatoes. When there was leftover ham to use up, this was where it went. Your mom sliced potatoes thin, layered them in the crock-pot with diced ham and onion, and poured a mixture of milk and a can of cream soup over the top. Then it cooked low all day until the potatoes went soft and creamy, and the whole thing set into a rich, comforting casserole without her turning on the oven once. That last part mattered in the summer, when nobody wanted a hot stove heating up the kitchen. A few potatoes, some leftover ham, and a can of soup made a full meal for the family. It came out of the crock bubbling and golden at the edges. This was the meal that turned Sunday's ham into Wednesday's dinner, and it did it while your mom was at work all day. Number 12. Lentil soup. Lentils were the quiet workhorse of the thrifty 1970s kitchen. They did not need soaking like other dried beans. They cooked down into a thick, earthy stew, and they cost almost nothing. Your mom would drop a bag of lentils in the crock-pot with a can of tomatoes, an onion, carrots, celery, and a ham bone, or a little sausage if there was any, then leave it to cook all day. By evening, it had turned into a hearty, filling pot of soup that stuck to your ribs and fed the whole family for pennies a bowl. Lentils are packed with protein, fiber, and iron, though nobody at the table was thinking about that. They just knew it was warm and good, and there was always enough. A pound of lentils cost less than most anything else in the store, and this pot proved that cheap and nourishing were the same thing all along. Number 11. Peyote roast. This was in the instruction booklet of nearly every crock-pot sold, and for a reason. It was the dish that convinced skeptical mothers the machine actually worked. A cheap chuck or rump roast, the kind that came out tough and gray in a hot oven, went into the pot over onions and carrots with a packet of onion soup mix sprinkled on top and a little water in the bottom. Then it cooked untouched for 9 hours. The onion soup packet was the trick, a shortcut that dissolved into a deep, savory gravy without any effort. The roast came out falling apart, sliceable with the side of a fork. Potatoes and carrots added in the morning softened into the meat. A chuck roast under $1 a pound fed the family Sunday dinner style on a random Tuesday. This was the meal that made a whole generation of mothers true believers in the beige pot on the counter. Number 10. Chili. Not the competition kind with hand-cut brisket, the weeknight kind. Your mom browned a pound of ground beef in the morning, drained it, and dumped it in the crock pot with a can of kidney beans, a can of tomatoes, chili powder, onion, and salt. Then she left. All day the flavors married and deepened, doing something a fast stovetop pot of chili could never do. By dinner, it had turned thick and rich and tasted even better than it had any right to. Chili was the ultimate batch meal, feeding the family the first night and tasting better on the second and third. A pound of beef and a couple of cans made a pot that stretched for days. Served with crackers, shredded cheese, or over a scoop of rice, it was cheap, filling, and forgiving. This was the meal a mother could make in her sleep, load before dawn, and forget about entirely. Number 9. Barbecue pulled pork. Long before every restaurant sold it, mothers were making it in the crock pot with a cheap pork shoulder, the fattiest and least expensive cut in the case. Your mom put the whole shoulder in the pot with a chopped onion and a little water or broth, then left it to cook for 10 hours until it was so tender it collapsed at the touch of a fork. She shredded it right in the pot with 2 forks, poured in a bottle of barbecue sauce, and let it soak up the flavor for another half hour. Piled onto soft buns, it fed a crowd for next to nothing. A pork shoulder was one of the cheapest things at the meat counter precisely because it needed long, slow cooking to become tender, which is exactly what the crock pot delivered while nobody was home. One shoulder made enough for a family dinner and sandwiches the next day. Number 8. Stuffed cabbage rolls. This was the meal that made an afternoon of work possible with none of the afternoon. In the old country and old kitchens, cabbage rolls meant standing at the stove tending a pot. Your mom softened cabbage leaves, rolled them around a mixture of ground beef, rice, and onion, and nestled the little bundles into the crock pot under a blanket of tomato sauce. Then it cooked low all day until the cabbage went silky, the rice swelled tender, and the sauce thickened around everything. The rice stretched a small amount of beef into a full meal, and the cabbage, cheap and long-lasting, became the wrapper that made it feel like real effort. Polish and Hungarian and German families across the industrial Midwest made this, each swearing their grandmother's version was the right one. In the crock-pot, it finally became a meal a working mother could actually put on the table. Number 7. Goulash. Third pattern break. Here is something worth noticing. The American version of goulash bore almost no resemblance to the Hungarian original, and nobody cared. It was elbow macaroni, browned ground beef, canned tomatoes and onion, cooked together into a thick, comforting one-pot meal that millions of kids grew up on. In the crock-pot, your mom browned the beef in the morning, dumped everything but the pasta in, and cooked it all day, adding the macaroni in the last hour so it did not turn to mush. This was American poverty food wearing a borrowed foreign name, and it fed a generation without complaint. It cost almost nothing, it reheated better the second day, and it asked nothing of the cook but a few minutes at dawn. The food companies never advertised it because there was no money in a box of macaroni and a can of tomatoes. That is exactly why it belonged to families instead of corporations. Number 6. Round steak in gravy. Farmers called cheap cuts like this a challenge. Mothers called it dinner. Your mom would lay tough round steak in the crock-pot, sprinkle it with flour, cover it with sliced onion and a can of cream of mushroom soup, thinned with a little water, and leave it for the day. The flour and soup melted into a thick brown gravy, and the meat, which would have been inedible cooked fast, came out fork tender after 8 hours. Served over mashed potatoes or noodles, it soaked everything in savory gravy. Round steak cost about $1 a pound because most people did not know how to make it good. Mothers with a crock-pot did. This was the meal that turned the cheapest steak in the store into something that tasted rich and slow-cooked and expensive, all while she was 3 towns away at work. Number 5. Beef tips over rice. Fourth pattern break. Pay attention here. This is the meal that shows exactly why the crock-pot mattered so much. Beef tips are the trimmings and end pieces, the odd bits left over when a butcher cut the good roasts, sold cheap because nobody knew what to do with them. Your mom did. She put them in the pot with beef broth, onion, mushrooms, and a spoonful of flour or a packet of gravy mix, then left them to cook all day until every tough little piece went tender and the liquid thickened into a deep brown gravy. Ladled over a bed of rice or egg noodles, it fed the family like a rich man's meal for a poor man's price. Here is the point nobody says out loud. The crock-pot did not just cook food, it rescued the cheap, forgotten, unwanted cuts of meat that fast cooking ruined. It let a working family eat the parts of the animal that the wealthy threw away, and it made them taste better. That was not an accident. That was the whole reason the machine sold millions. Number 4, chicken a la king. This one fed a family of 6 for under $2, and it looked like something from a hotel banquet. Your mom put cut-up chicken in the crock-pot with a can of cream of chicken soup, mushrooms, diced pimento for a pop of red, and a little milk, then let it cook all day into a rich, creamy sauce studded with tender chicken. She served it over toast points, biscuits, rice, or those crispy chow mein noodles that were fashionable at the time. The pimento made it look fancy. The cream soup made it foolproof. A little chicken went a long way stretched in all that sauce. This was the dish a mother served when the church group or the in-laws were coming and she wanted to impress without spending a fortune or a whole day cooking. It cost pocket change and tasted like a special occasion, and it had been quietly waiting in the crock since morning. Number 3, Swedish meatballs. This was served in church basements, potlucks, and every farmhouse from Minnesota to Iowa. Your mom mixed ground beef with breadcrumbs soaked in milk, a little egg and onion, rolled it into small meatballs, and browned them in the morning. Then they went into the crock-pot with a sauce of beef broth and cream of mushroom soup, cooking gently all day until they were impossibly tender. Right before serving, she stirred in sour cream to make the sauce silky and rich, then spooned the whole thing over egg noodles or mashed potatoes. The milk-soaked bread inside the meatballs kept them moist and stretched the meat further, an old trick that mothers knew by heart. This was the dish that showed up at every potluck in a covered crock-pot with a serving spoon sticking out of it, kept warm for hours, feeding a crowd for almost nothing. It was the taste of a Scandinavian-American Midwest that ran on generosity and thrift in equal measure. Number 2, short ribs. Before short ribs became a trendy restaurant cut selling for a fortune, they were among the cheapest, boniest, most overlooked things at the meat counter, and mothers with a crock pot knew their secret. Your mom would brown the ribs, set them in the pot over onions, and cover them with a mixture of tomato, a little vinegar, brown sugar, and Worcestershire, then leave them for the whole day. Short ribs are all tough, connective tissue and bone, which is exactly why fast cooking fails them and slow cooking transforms them. After 9 hours, the meat fell off the bone and melted, and the sauce reduced into something deep and glossy and rich. This cut cost pennies a pound in the 1970s because it required patience nobody had time for during a workday. The crock-pot supplied the patience. What was once the cheapest thing in the case came out tasting like the most expensive meal on the table. Number 1, beef roast, the whole day workhorse. At the top of this list is the meal that defined the crock-pot era so completely that it almost feels too obvious to name. A roast, an onion, a handful of carrots and potatoes, a little water, salt and pepper loaded into the pot before dawn and forgotten until dark. That is it. This is the meal that appears in every memory of a 1970s childhood. The smell that hit you the moment you walked in from school, the reason a house felt warm and lived in even when both parents had been gone all day. It cost almost nothing because it used the cheapest roast in the store, the one that only turned tender through hours of slow, gentle heat. It fed the whole family and left enough for sandwiches. It asked nothing of the cook but a few minutes at sunrise, and it did the one thing nothing else in that decade could do. It made a working mother's family feel like someone had been home all day cooking for them, when the truth was she had loved them enough to figure out how to be in 2 places at once. That is the meal we should remember most. Here is my challenge. Make one of these this week. Just one. The pot roast, the split pea soup, the beef tips over rice. Load it before you leave in the morning and come home to it the way your mother or grandmother did. Then come back and tell me if it tasted like getting your time back. Drop the one you are going to try in the comments. I want to know if the pot roast gets more love than the Swedish meatballs. Because these were never just recipes. They were how a whole generation of mothers fed their families and kept their jobs and held it all together, one beige pot at a time.